All
I'm here.
right, Sean, thanks for joining us,
Hello.
man. How are you?
I am pretty good. I'm a little sick, so you'll hear it in my voice, but otherwise I'm good.
Oh, awesome,
Lucky,
man. Awesome.
lucky for you all, I'm on Zoom and not in the room with you.
I mean, dude, we'll take you in any state, man.
Thank
It's
you.
really great to have you. We'll take the risk, you know what I mean? But
Same
but dude,
here.
thanks for coming, man. I think it's kind of funny. I think literally the last time I saw you, you were interviewing me at an event. So now returning the favor, all good.
Absolutely.
Swear.
How the tides have turned.
I love it, man. Awesome. So Sean, we have a bunch of Princeton students in the audience. And so the way I thought we would do this is we would start with your background. And I think what the students find really valuable is kind of focusing on the decisions you made and why you made them, and kind of how you got from, you can imagine like a college student graduating where they are now to being the juggernaut that you are today, kind of how to be like Sean. So I thought we'd start with that, and then I think they have a few questions for you, and it'll just be a lot of fun.
So I'm originally from Southern California. I was really interested in computers as a kid. One of my one of the things that I think was most formative in my childhood is I didn't really care about school, and it's funny to say that to a bunch of Princeton kids, but it was a superpower because it meant instead of doing homework, I would just go do 12-hour sessions on my computer or whatever. And I think it's really hard to learn things when you have huge amounts of context switching. I really think you have to kind of just go be obsessed with something for a prolonged period of time. And I did a lot of that as a kid. But later on, I got really interested in math. Um, Went to USC undergrad because I had a 1.8 GPA in high school. It wasn't as good as all of yours, but I was pretty good at math, even by Princeton standards, and ended up starting a math PhD at Stanford. One of my best friends from there is a professor at Princeton now. His name's Boris Hannon. He teaches, does theory of deep learning. You guys should take his classes. He's really, really good. Anyways, from math, I kind of realized that I actually like physics more and felt like the most interesting stuff happening in physics was all around this area called quantum information, which today is well known, but in 2007 was a really, really small community. So I actually moved to Caltech to work on that. While I was at Caltech, I got very lucky. I met this woman named Regina Dugan. Regina was running DARPA at the time. Met her randomly at a Caltech event. She'd done her PhD at Caltech. And there's a little bit more to the story than just that, but basically she recruited me on the spot to work on a DARPA project related to the war in Afghanistan. And the whole thing happened very fast. I basically had to say yes within a few hours and moved to DC with the backpack, went to Afghanistan for 4 months as part of that, worked on this program for 2 years. I think this is actually a very important part of the story, though, in the sense that when I did this, it may sound obvious. Oh yeah, you get an opportunity to go work at DARPA, you should go do it. I was in the middle of my PhD. I was starting to write my thesis. I thought I was going to be a professor. I had graduate fellowships, NSF and NDSCG fellowships. They told me that I would lose both those fellowships if I took a sabbatical to go to DARPA. There were a lot of things. I really had to change my path on a dime. I had a few hours to make a decision. And I think that one of the things that I've done well and is actually hard to do is totally changing your life path on a dime when you see that there's some incredible opportunity that you just kind of can't ignore. Most people, when those types of opportunities come up, I feel bad using this word, but it's the true word. They're a little too lazy and a little too afraid. And you really need to just be willing to get off the couch. And if someone says, hey, if you can be in DC tonight and you're in California for a meeting with a general, can you do it? You just say yes, and you find a way to make it happen. And that's probably the thing I've done the best in my life, is being willing to really change my entire life path. From
So
there,
Sean, I wanna just go into that a bit because it's really interesting. We had, I think, Hasib Qureshi on a few weeks earlier, and it's so funny because I think he said a similar thing where he said his number one thing he did is he would not listen to momentum, basically, right? And just, and he's also like a poker player, so it's very like related to him being a poker player where he's like, oh, I got to fold this. Oh, I got to call this really hard. And so it really sounds like that kind of, and the other thing that's crazy to me is that's not like, oh, you were doing a little side project and you decided to stop doing it. That's like you were on a track, right? You were on like a deep
I would be a professor right now if I would have doing
and
that.
How did you even like go about doing that calculus to decide A over B? I mean, that's probably, I hope no students ever have to make that decision because that's really hard. Yeah. But is there any advice you can give them on how you broke out of it?
I'll say a little bit here and then I'll go back to the story. I pre-compute a lot of things. Like I really do think through as many paths, as many branches of the universe as I can, like at all stages. And it's kind of just ingrained in who I am. Some people have this. I actually think there's pretty high correlation with IQ. Like I think a lot of people at Princeton probably do this too. But I really think it's a valuable skill to think. I mean, there was a study done. It was social behavioral sciences, so I don't know if it's replicable, but there was a study done where they looked at people that survived like fatal accidents, such as bus crashes, plane crashes, etc. And those people have way higher rates than normal of just like visualizing everything. Like for example, for myself, whenever I get on a plane, I literally visualize like if there was a disaster, if all these different scenarios happen, like what would it look like? The plane's rotating, like people are flying through the aisles, like how would I get to the door? Where's the escape hatch? Like what, where would I want to be sitting if that went wrong? And I'm using this as like a really extreme, horrible example, but I'm doing this for everything all the time. And it's kind of paralyzing in some ways. It slows you down in some ways. I mean, even simple things like I'm going to cross the street. Should I cross the street right here where the angle's a little bit better? Or should I go to the crosswalk? Or should I, I kind of think through all the paths all the time as much as I can. And so it means when some big new branch opens up, like I think I've actually usually thought about some, not that exact version, but some partial version. And as a total crackpot, crypto man, like sharing a theory, I actually think that a lot of times this is what deja vu is. There might be multiple types of deja vu, but I have a really strong visual memory. And so for me, a lot of times when I've had deja vu, that feeling, it's usually actually when I'm remembering that I had already pre-computed some instance, usually in a dream. And then you just have this extreme sense of, oh my gosh, this is weird. I feel like this already happened or whatever, but it's because you actually like went through the scenario in your head in a very deep way already. But anyways, yeah.
And Shaun, I'll even add on to that because I try to do this. I think I'm probably not quite as good at it as you are, but I actually read a book that I really liked. It was called, I think, A Guide to the Good Life, where it summarizes, I think, like Stoicism, and it calls it negative visualization. So they actually posit that people who do what you're saying, which is visualize all the paths, especially the negative ones, are actually happier.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know if you've experienced that, or because it's kind of interesting, right? Where when something bad happens, you've already cached kind of the result, so maybe it doesn't impact. Maybe you're better at making decisions emotionlessly, maybe also, which is a good quality, I imagine. But
I've never looked into that like line of research, but it seems right to me. So
right.
It's kind of you're smoothing out the effect rather than having it taking it all at once.
So DARPA comes up, and you've kind of been
I worked there for 2 years. We did really high impact work. Like hard to even explain the level of impact. Got a good reputation from that. As I was leaving, kind of randomly came up with the idea for a cybersecurity project. DARPA presented it to the director of DARPA that week, like my last week. they created a $110 million program around the idea. And DARPA is structured in a weird way where like you're normally only stay for 2 to 5 years. Like no one ever stays for more than 5 years. It's an extreme exception. It's designed to, you just go for one project and then you leave. And so it's not like once you've left, like there's not a conflict of interest or anything. And so I created a company and applied to win some of the money for this program that I had helped kind of come up with the idea for, and ended up winning a $10.5 million contract with myself and 2 friends. And it was a kind of total accident. But so like we had a company because we had and it was over 4 years, but we had a $10.5 million contract. And so we started hiring people. It took about a year from the time that we started the company before money started coming in. So we were trying to finish our PhDs in that period. My 2 co-founders also have PhDs. And from there, we just started the company. We ran with it for a while. We ended up selling the company to Palo Alto Networks. But for me, after 4 years, I actually really wanted to finish. I hadn't finished my PhD yet. I really wanted to finish it. So I kind of went into a part-time role with the company, went back to Caltech, finished my PhD. While I was there, I got recruited to work at GV, Google Ventures. GV said that I could work half-time and that they would pay me like a full salary. My grad student salary was $30,000 and it became $32,500 like around then. And then, to get a venture capital salary on top of that for half-time work, like it was a pretty good gig. And so I did that. And I just really like being a VC suits me. It's funny, there's an article going around this week around like how a bunch of young people that join VC feel catfished. And I actually think that's correct. Like almost every time when I talk to a young person that wants to go into VC, I tell them, do not go into VC. Like it's very similar advice I would give to someone if they want to do a PhD. Like my PhD was the best time of my life. I absolutely loved it, but you should only do a PhD if you are obsessed with the area of research you're doing. Like if you're willing to forego money, live like a monk, that just all you want to do is do that research. And if you can't really do that in industry. And so for me, I was really passionate about like quantum information as it applies to black holes and, fundamental questions about the universe. And you can't do that. Now you can kind of do it at Google, but before that, you could only do it in academia. And I think it's the same thing with VC. Like if you're joining VC as a kind of junior person, like I think it's not a great job unless you are just absolutely obsessed with companies. Like if you're just obsessed, if your entire childhood, if you were like a mini Warren Buffett and were reading, every book you could get your hands on about the history of different companies, how they were formed, reading S1s, all that, then I think you'll probably really like the job. But for most, I don't think you will. So anyways, I kind of accidentally became a VC, and it's a good fit for my personality, like very broad interests, very ADHD. I've actually started multiple early stage companies. And so I have that kind of wisdom, the good lessons and the bad lessons that I can share with other people. And so I'll pause and give it back to you.
No, this is great, man. I love it. And so I'll go back. I've been queuing up some fun, like digging into it a bit. But basically, so after you get out of DARPA, you have kind of a product market fit with something that the government thought was important, basically. And it sounds like you basically formed a company and applied for the grant and got it, right? It kind of sounds like what happened. And how did you go from that to making it more broadly applicable, right? And is this Expanse?
It was originally called Cadium, and then we renamed it to Expanse.
That's great. Cool.
The first contract we got was for this thing called Plan X. It was a kind of a AI meets cybersecurity program. Because we knew how DARPA worked and how government kind of contracting worked, we actually applied for a lot of research programs in the early days, and we won a bunch. Like we had contracts in pure AI, we had contracts in big data, in cybersecurity. And so we're kind of, in the beginning, we didn't have a enterprise business. It was purely like a government research company in a lot of ways. But we knew from the very beginning that eventually we wanted to turn one of those ideas into an enterprise product. We just didn't know exactly what it would be. But having all this government money let us hire quite literally some of the most brilliant people in the world. And from there, we ended up, one of my co-founders really came up with, I'll give him the credit, like he came up with the enterprise product idea. And we started selling it. One of the things, a mistake that I think a lot of people make is like, they go heads down and try to build out the product rather than like really testing if you have product market fit in the early days. So the original product was, we basically built this global botnet or port scanner. Like we were mapping the entire internet. Like we were scanning every single machine on the internet every hour or so and storing the data around what was where. And using that, one of the things we were doing with that was figuring out what companies' networks were and where vulnerabilities were on their network, kind of the outside-in view. And to test if there was value there, we started selling, from like the very beginning, we started selling $50,000 a piece PDFs to big companies, like to hedge funds or to Fortune 500 companies. And so literally they would pay us $50,000 for like a 50-page PDF that would just have a list of, you know, their IP addresses with vulnerabilities kind of like from highest severity to lowest. And they could pay an extra like $25,000 and I would go to their board meeting for the company and like explain what was in the PDF report. And the fact that people were willing to pay us, you know, 50 to 100 grand for a PDF report meant that we had like something really valuable. And so from there, probably took like another year and a half to really build it into an enterprise product, something that, you know, our first true like recurring revenue customer was Goldman Sachs. Second was CVS. Getting someone like Goldman Sachs to run your software on their network, like it's actually pretty hard. They need to really audit the code, make sure they feel comfortable that you're not stealing their data or IP or anything. And so there was, call it a year and a half period to take this just PDFs to enterprise grade. One of the things that we did well in that period that I think is really underrated is, candidly, I was really like building relationships with who I knew were going to be my customers in the future. And the key point is like building relationships when I wasn't selling them anything yet. Like I knew that someday I'd be selling them something. And there's something like from behavioral psychology, you know, where if you're just getting to know someone and it's like a purely like there's nothing being sold. It's kind of just maybe something in the future, but it's a much more organic relationship. People are just much more happy to engage with you. It's much more genuine. You can build a lot more trust that way. And then call it a year and a half, 2 years later, when we were ready to sell something to them, like we already knew these people really well and they already trusted us and we'd already tried to help in other ways. And so kind of by the time we were actually ready to sell the enterprise product, we did really well and got really elite customers and it grew really fast from there.
This is such a great story. And the other thing, Shaun, I want to point out for the students is oftentimes, you know, someone who's in VC, they won't really have that much operator experience. But in your case, it's exactly the opposite. I mean, Expanse was a huge exit, and my brother worked there and all this kind of stuff. So,
which is an amazing connection.
Yeah. It's so crazy, like, how small the world is sometimes. But yeah, and so I guess basically that gave you kind of that operator experience component, which is, to me, so important in a VC, and yet so many don't have it.
I also helped start a LiDAR company called Luminar, which is a public company now worth $3 billion.
I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
I'll tell that story very quickly because I'll tell the very quick version. This is an insane story, but basically, I had this really weird childhood where I had horrible grades, but I wasn't stupid and was building all these crazy things in my hometown, and so I kind of had this reputation. And parents in the area would come to me they would go to my parents and say, hey, we have this kid, we think they're smart, like, will your son talk to them? And I talked to a lot of kids, probably 50 kids. And out of those 50, 48 of them, the parents were just helicopter parents, to be candid. Two of the kids, though, were like freak geniuses. One of whom was this kid, Austin Russell. And so when I was working at DARPA, I was 25. Austin was 15. His parents, like Austin he was building crazy shit in his garage. His parents didn't know what to do with him. I talked to him. At the time, at 15, he had built a 100 kilowatt laser from scratch. He had built a supercomputer that was the single fastest node in folding at home. And the way he had paid for it was by basically using all the smaller versions and like selling compute time to Stanford University and other like academics. He had built a gestural interface glove that you could like a bunch of infrared lasers that you could use to control windows. And he had built like a very, very early LiDAR prototype. So anyways, realized he was pretty special and helped but he had bad grades and all that, to help mentor him, helped him get into Stanford, and then got a Teal Fellowship, dropped out, started Luminar, and he's been insane to watch what he's done. But so that's another one where I got to see it from before the company even started, and I'm on the board of Luminar, so I get to see it now at this scale.
Wow, man. It all comes back to you, right? It's kind of, you're just helping the kid because you see potential in him, and then ends up starting $1 billion company. Like, it's actually, I guess it's kind of the universe or a bit of karma. But that's amazing, man. I think that's cool.
The best things that have happened to me in my life have come from just trying to help other people with genuine intentions. And it's not scalable. Like, I can't do it for everyone, but it's underrated.
That's great, man. So Shaun, I just want to skip to the end, and then I want to spend at least 5-ish minutes on questions. But I was wondering, Shaun, so now you're at Sequoia, obviously, and I was wondering, for the students, kind of what's your day like at Sequoia? And then also if you can quickly touch on, again, because all of these students are kind of entrepreneurial, they're excited about working on kind of the next big thing. Do you have any thoughts on what a student in college could be working on today that's can be super concrete or high level, anything like that they really find value in also? So I'll leave it to you, and then we'll go to questions after that.
Let me answer the second one first, and then I'll go to the first one. In terms of what you can be working on, Nader said this earlier, but like I deeply believe in being counter-cyclical. I think that so when I was graduating college, it was the most prestigious thing was to go into investment banking. Everyone wanted to go into investment banking. When you're going with the herd, you're just one of a million, and it's very few people have actual edge there. Like a year ago, crypto was all the rage. It was not a great time to go jump into crypto. The better time was to do it when it was the backwater, when Nader and I were hanging out in there. Right now AI is all the rage. Like, I believe AI is going to be one of the most important new technologies of the next decade, but you kind of have to have the realization that if you jump in right now, you're jumping in kind of towards the top of a local maxima. Like AI has been very cyclical. This is not the first AI wave. This is, in my life, already the third or fourth. There was one like this in the autonomous vehicle summer of 2018, where it's just, anyways, there've been a few of these. To me, the people I know that are the happiest and most successful are people that have pursued their true, genuine passions, that are oftentimes esoteric. It's like, if you are obsessed with streetwear, go and you want to start a company, go into the streetwear space, even though there's no AI involved. If you are obsessed with restaurants, like my brother-in-law started Sweetgreen, go start a salad company. If you are obsessed with the chemicals industry, chemicals does 4 or 5 trillion a year in revenue, and there's always going to be opportunities there. Go start a chemicals company. People, you really have to do what is going to make you really passionate to get out of bed every day, and oftentimes something that other people aren't looking at. And then on Sequoia, so I do VC different than other people. For me, the way I'm supposed to do my job and the way that most of my partners do it is they meet with a lot of companies. So out of the week, like Mondays are our partner meeting days and internal meetings. And so like basically every Monday is that for me. But out of Tuesday through Friday, most of my partners probably spend 50% of their time meeting with new companies, 25% of their time working with their existing companies, and 25% of their time like doing diligence on either some new idea they're working on or a company that's kind of in active pursuit. And there's extreme context switching. Like there's no free time in the day. It's like, 30 minutes of meeting with the company, 30 minutes of meeting with the company, 30 minutes to do a reference call, 30 minutes of this or whatever. And for me, like my superpower, my life has always been like creativity and just like seeing the world different than other people. And so it's hard to do this, but I really try to actually say no to most meetings. Like I probably spend 60-70% of my time working with my portfolio companies. Like that's what I enjoy much more. So like I spend 60-70% of that time, my time on that instead of 25%. Like I actually really don't like meeting with new companies that much. I just vastly prefer, and I have to do it, but I really actually say no to a lot of meetings, even if the founders are probably really talented and all that.
Yeah, and Shaun, I can back that up. I mean, I think for us, you've been one of the absolutely most helpful VCs, and I've had over 200 investors, right? And I can tell you, like 195 of them, they'll invest, they'll say they're going to help you, and you never hear from them again, and you're like, hey, can you help me with this thing? And they don't even, like respond to an email, or it's like, it's tough to get their help. But you, every time, I mean, Shaun, thank you so much for everything. And I think it's a rare quality in many ways. So Shaun, I want to do a couple minutes of questions. If you can spare a couple more minutes. Okay, awesome.
Of course, I'm free.
Awesome. Does anyone have any questions for Shaun?
Hey, thanks so much for your talk. So I'm just wondering, sort of, how do you see what's the sort of core competitiveness of a VC? Because I've heard different answers to it, and people, like a lot of it are like brand powers, but brand powers are sort of, I guess, the external factors. I guess I'm curious in terms of internal competitiveness. Yeah. How do you see different VCs distinguish from each other?
Great question. I don't think VC brands are as durable as many people think, and you see this, like when I started my company in 2012, like the firms that were seen as top firms were very different. Like Sequoia was one of them. Benchmark was just starting to rise in prestige. Kleiner Perkins was probably the most prestigious at the time. Anyways, like these things, NEA was still incredibly prestigious. Like if you go to 2000, the firms that were prestigious was completely different than, what it was in 2012 and today. And so like, that means that it's not just about like the brands or anything. It's really about, I'd say two things. One, firms are kind of only as good as their most recent investment. That's the philosophy we have at Sequoia of like, if we're not backing 3 out of the 10 best companies every year, then we're just gonna become irrelevant over time. And so we have to, you have to make the best investments. You have to get the absolute best companies. And the second thing is, we're only as good as the individual investors at Sequoia, and like a lot of it is really the reputation of those individuals as well. And so there's this tension between, you have to have like individual partners that have good judgment in companies, good personal brands, know how to actually build companies and add value and all of that, and are going to have a great reputation in the ecosystem and kind of add to the reputation of the firm. And then you also need to have all the teamwork of like at Sequoia, we take teamwork incredibly seriously. And so things like helping your partners win competitive investments, helping them with their portfolio. Like maybe one of my companies needs an introduction to Tim Cook from Apple, and I don't have that introduction, but one of my partners can get that introduction. And just these types of things actually make a really big impact. Like I think there's multiple companies in Sequoia's history, things like WhatsApp that was sold for $20 billion to Facebook, where, without the right relationships and all that, like that probably wouldn't have happened. And so I think there's really it's a collection of individuals, but you also have to make each other better as a team. And you're really these are not permanent advantages. Like it's really, you have to just be going really fast.
Hi, Shaun. My name is Jack. Thanks very much for your time. I'm just curious. What are your thoughts on kind of the synthetic biospace, especially kind of non-therapeutic innovations in this space, and then also kind of other computing paradigms like computing in wetware and things of that sort?
On SynBio, I think it's really interesting. I think you have to just find the right initial vertical. A mistake that I think a lot of people make, so I love hardware in general, and the way you have to think about a hardware company is very different than a software company. And I think one of the big differences is with hardware, it's actually better to start with a really small niche market that you can just like dominate and get going quickly and get revenue and understand your supply chain and all that, rather than starting with a really big initial market in hardware. With software, you want to start with a really big initial market. I could unpack this for a very long time, but like a couple comments are: one, software companies almost never have a successful act two. Like software companies can get really big really fast. They almost never have a successful act two. Hardware companies are the opposite. Like hardware companies take a long time to get going. They almost always have successful act twos. The hardest part is like managing supply chain, getting your first factory going, getting your initial customers happy, like, you know, getting the atoms to work properly together in nature. So like Solugen, which I think is an interesting company that is related to SynBio, they started off by selling hydrogen peroxide, the green hydrogen peroxide, just to float spas. Literally like the Epsom salt bath spas that you go like, you know, in the deprivation chamber in. And that was their initial market. And now they're doing hundreds of millions of revenue, you know, in much, much larger markets. And with SynBio, I think if you're trying to start with a therapeutic, you're trying to start by like replacing oil in the beginning, I think it's just too hard. I think you have to go and start with some small niche market where people are willing to accept some imperfections and pay higher margins and all that, and then kind of scale up from there.
Hi, Shaun. Thank you for talking to us today. My name is Archie. Looking at a list of your investments, you obviously think very deeply about the crypto and blockchain space, as you've invested in alternative layer ones and also kind of interoperability protocols. So my question to you is, in 2030, which chains that are around today are going to be still being used by lots of people, or potentially many more people?
Amazing question, Archie. I wish I knew the answer to that. The way I think about crypto, like, which you're hitting, like, this is the key point, like you nailed it. But like, I am very, very bullish on crypto as a category, like, over the next 20, 30 years. And I don't think the primary usage or value prop is strongest in America. Like the strongest need and demand is in developing nations. It's in, you know, parts of the world where the financial infrastructure is much weaker and the central banks are much weaker. And so I am very bullish on crypto as a category, but I really don't know which individual L1s will kind of rise to the occasion. I suspect Bitcoin will probably still be a thing, but it might just be as a store of value. And Ethereum is getting pretty close to where I think it has longevity, but even Ethereum and everything else, like they can basically all be replaced if something better comes along that reaches escape velocity and all that. So I really don't know the answer.
Hi, Shaun. Thanks for the doc and sharing your experiences. So one of the things that you said was that when you were trying to build an enterprise product, you spent a lot of time early on actually finding that product market fit instead of just building that product out, and how that's sort of something people forget to do. As someone with, you know, some as you mentioned, esoteric ideas. For example, I'm really obsessed with this idea of building a better dumb phone or a phone that can help you focus. It's the sort of thing which, when I tell it to people, people are super skeptical that anyone's going to want to give up these increasingly powerful new devices. But I personally, I use a flip phone. It's something that I'm super interested in, but I want to go out there and build a better thesis to persuade both myself and potentially other people that this is something that I can really do, and there is maybe a niche market, but a real market that exists. So do you have any ideas for how to go about developing or proving out that product market fit?
I think so. For ideas like that, I would give you the same advice I said before. I would personally not go invest a bunch of your time or money into that without validating the idea a little bit more. And so, with Oculus very famously started with a Kickstarter, and they got huge amounts of pre-orders, which then gave them capital to go and build the thing, and showed them that there's the demand for it. I think you need, in my opinion, you need something like that. See if people would be willing to put down a deposit or whatever, where the thing doesn't exist, but you can make a good mock-up of it and explain why. I think for something like this, you need a really funny, viral YouTube video, TikTok video, accompanying it. I think you have no chance unless you have a massive marketing advantage to go actually, because I think it's probably only today 1 in 1,000 people that feel the same way as you, but it is probably something like 1 in 1,000, and it may grow to 1 in 100. So finding those needles in a haystack is hard, and you need to have something that has such a wide net that you can actually go find 10,000 plus of those people in the world. And so I think that if you go try to just build this and then ship it once it's ready, it's very unlikely to be successful. The way to make it more likely to be successful is to go find those people now, already get them engaged, and that's going to be the hard part. It's not actually building the phone. It's going to be finding the users.
Hey, Shaun, thanks for the talk today. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on where you would draw the line in the sand between fads in AI and paradigms that you think are more substantive.
Great question. I really I love AI. I did AI research starting in 2002, and spent a little bit of time in the stats department at Stanford. So I love AI. I don't want to be misinterpreted. I think that going after unsexy verticals with AI is something that right now is an amazing opportunity. So, going into bringing, for example, I met with a company recently that is trying to change the way that people buy electronics. So today, when you want to go buy semi-commodity electronic parts, the PCBs that go in something, or even capacitors or transistors or other things, the way this happens is people will hire a broker, or usually 10 different brokers. Those people will email or text or call or send WhatsApp messages or whatever to other people. And by the time you actually find what you're looking for, there's oftentimes about 1,000 human-to-human interactions across many different time zones, many different languages, many different messaging platforms. Almost all of it actually happens via text, because with the phone, the time zones are hard and languages are hard. And so things like automating that whole process, because you can now do the natural language translation well, you can do the formatting of the data well, and so if you can go find something where you're replacing 1,000 individual human interactions and making all of that automated, where the humans on the other side don't even know that they're interacting with AI, things like that in non-sexy industries are already right now big opportunities that were not possible for a startup even 6 months ago. So things like that I think are really good opportunities if you find the right thing. And in general, like applying AI to very specific, narrow applications, I think is very rich right now. Things like just building, like just purely just using generative AI to do something relatively easy or commoditized, or even like trying to build the models, unless you're a researcher at a top place, but like as a startup, I think unless you have an incredibly clear either advantage or insight about how you're going to get like a unique data set, I think the only thing right now that I think is really obvious is doing like niche application specific AI.
Shaun, thank you so much for coming, man. I really appreciate it. And I wanted to add one more piece of context just for the students, which is that I'm in a weird position where I have a lot of investors, right? As you know, in crypto, often your project gets hundreds of investors, which is our case. And I just wanted to point out for the students, which is something that's not easy to tell, but Shaun, you are absolutely like a top 3 investor in our project, and I think most other founders I talk to would say the same. And I think it's specifically, there's like really 2 things. The first thing is you have so much of your own independent thought that's actually useful. And I think a lot of founders can relate to having an investor and you ask them, hey, what do you think of this category or whatever, and the investor says, oh, what do you think about that you know, and I think with you it's the opposite, where you actually have that kind of model forecasting all the paths, and so it's really helpful there. And then you just care. You know, you show up on a Saturday when you're sick and you help us out and help the students out, and I really appreciate it, man.
The latter is the one that means the most to me. Thank you so much. Like, I really do care, and I think it really is rare in VC. Like a lot of VCs are just trying to make money, and like I think it's really important to do what you love.
And I have the raw data. I have over 200 investors, and there's like 5 that are like you, and you're the top out of the 5, right? So that's if you want the statistics, that's where you are. Thank you so much, Shaun. Really appreciate it. Everybody, thank you, guys. Yeah.